you've heard Jamie on the news or read his op-eds, you know that he's comfortable issuing these grand-scale warnings that CRISPR and AI could upend civilization, and invitations to build a global operating system that can keep up with all of this. What I want to do today in this conversation with Jamie is probe the connective tissue between those two ideas. How does a species that can rewrite its own code, that's building thinking machines, actually govern itself with these technologies without tearing itself apart? We'll start with the biology, then move to the algorithms of intelligence, and then finally finish off with the messy geopolitics that can either sabotage or safeguard this entire experiment. Some of the topics that I wanted to focus on is, in a lot of your books and your articles, you warn us that the next decade could come from a century's worth of tech progress. So I want to dive straight into how that actually lands on our species, from hacking our own DNA to AI running our world, and whether geopolitics can kind of keep a lid on any of that. The first question that I wanted to ask you,
Right.
So you said that many of our children may remember sex-based reproduction the way that we remember rotary phones, like technically possible, but mostly nostalgic. And yet there's obviously every serious scientific body still calls heritable genome editing premature and potentially irresponsible. So I wanted to ask you sort of what concrete threshold do you think, scientific, ethical, political, do you think would have to be crossed before you would personally endorse lifting today's kind of moratorium on germline editing? I've actually spoken with Jiankui, who is the scientist who gene edited the twin babies. So I wanted to get your perspective. And obviously, like, who gets to actually clarify that threshold has actually been met? Is it the government, scientists?
So it's a great question, Shriya, and I'm very much of the belief that we are currently not ready to engage in the genome editing of implanted human embryos to be taken to term, which is why I believe that Jiankui, who you just referenced, really is his behavior has been highly unethical. I think his prison term was fully justified. But that doesn't mean that we're never going to be able to use these technologies safely. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't in the future use these technologies in appropriate contexts where we can weigh the possible benefits against the possible risks. And so certainly at some point in the future, the first step will be nothing like what Hu Jiankui did in China in 2018, where he wasn't even trying to make the edits, which apparently he didn't do very accurately or effectively or with any of the necessary safeguards. But the thing that he was trying to do by manipulating the CCR gene wasn't even designed to have a therapeutic effect. It was designed to have some kind of enhancement in the future, in this case, that could have been addressed in much less aggressive ways. So in the future, I do believe that we are, as you referenced from my previous book, Hacking Darwin, I do think that we are going to cross that threshold. And the reason why is that nature has built-in errors. From Darwin's perspective, it's the random mutation that is the driver of evolution. Of course, as you know, random mutation plus natural selection equals evolution of species. And that means that every one of us is different from our parents in some way or another. And sometimes those genetic mutations show up in ways that are just harmful, or at least harmful to us. And so we have children, for example, who are born with very deadly genetic disorders. And some of those kids live very short, painful lives. We have some people who have genetic abnormalities that may show up only later in life, like early onset Alzheimer's, early onset genetic forms of breast cancer. And so over time, we're going to recognize that there will be optimal moments for us to intervene in order to optimize health benefits and minimize harms. And in some cases, it'll be like we do healthcare now. Maybe you'll be 70, 80 years old, and some symptom will manifest that has developed over decades, even though its origin was some kind of genetic abnormality. And certainly I do a lot of speaking and writing on the future of healthcare and how we're moving from generalized healthcare to personalized or precision healthcare. And the next step beyond that will be predictive and preventive. So a next step in our world of predictive and preventive healthcare is we'll say, well, you have an increased risk of some, whether type 2 diabetes or breast cancer. And so earlier in life, we're going to do more testing. We're going to have lifestyle interventions to decrease that risk. And then we'll have scenarios where we're moving back in time and we'll say you have this abnormality, but the best way to treat it would be through a fetal surgery. And it happens all the time. In order to make a small number of genetic changes, will be at the point when a future person is a pre-implanted embryo. And we can change a mutation that could lead to a lot of pain, suffering, and death into something that is just the same as everybody else. And I think when we cross that threshold, I think we'll get more and more comfortable with saying we're going to intervene at whatever the optimal time is along the human life and pre-life cycle. But that will be just the beginning of the process, because once we get comfortable with that, we'll say, all right, well, what if we can do the things like Jiankui was trying to do, even though it was highly unethical, but to say, well, health and what we call illness exist on a spectrum. And that spectrum is in many ways culturally determined. But are there things where if you could give somebody greater longevity, greater robustness, greater resistance to viral assaults or other things, would we want to do that? And we'll have that debate. And my guess is some of us will want to do it and some won't. And some societies will be more comfortable with those kinds of interventions. Maybe they believe they'll enhance health and decrease the costs of healthcare. And then the next step will be, once we've crossed that threshold, to say, what if we can have additional benefits of different changes and different mutations that may help us do things that we want to do, maybe be smarter in certain ways, maybe be stronger in certain ways, more resistant to certain violations and assaults. And so I just think this isn't going to happen over time. But I do think that we will get to a point where the error rate of applied science will be less than the error rate of just letting unadorned nature take its course. And that's when this shift is going to. I was a member of the World Health Organization Expert Advisory Committee on Human Genome Editing, which was created in the aftermath of the debacle for good reason. Yeah. We didn't say that the genetic manipulation of pre-implanted human embryos should never happen. What we said is it's not safe or ethical for it to happen now. And here's a framework and a broad governance framework for how it could be better applied in the future.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we're already seeing a lot of gene therapies being approved for monogenetic disorders, so like a single gene mutation. And so that obviously technically seems very feasible. If someone has a single base pair that you can just change, why not change it to dramatically improve human?
The gene therapies that are now being used very effectively in the early stages for sickle cell disease and different blood disorders, and now we're moving to liver. Those aren't heritable. It's when we cross the germline to making heritable changes that more of the ethical issues apply. That doesn't mean that there aren't huge ethical issues on somatic gene therapies, because this is the second wave of gene therapies. The first wave came to a crashing halt in 1999 when there was a death at the University of Pennsylvania as a result of some wrong practices at the University of Pennsylvania. And so gene therapy died in the late 90s and the early aughts. This is the second spring of gene therapies. All of these interventions are very aggressive. We live in a world, our biology represents almost 4 billion years of evolution and lots of evolutionary trade-offs. It's not that the body is so inefficient that we can go and just make one change and not have significant implications elsewhere, which is why we need to be careful, cautious, and judicious going forward.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think that event really set us back?
Oh, very much so. One of the reasons why I was careful in my language here, because your fellow students may listen to this, and I know that you're also pure and have never heard foul language before in your lives. But Jiankui is a scoundrel, in my view, and that by racing to be first and being extremely uncareful, he put people's lives at risk, and he put this whole field at risk. Generations of people on whose shoulders all of us stand did not do their work to have a highly unethical scallywag abuse this science in his own words in pursuit of a Nobel Prize and the glory of the Chinese state. This should have been very careful. The first step should have been done with total transparency, addressing a clear unmet need that couldn't be addressed anyway. And so He Jiankui was certainly a blow to this entire field and a warning shot about what will happen next if we don't have proper governance, oversight, and regulation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that I've been thinking about recently is that was created to be a collective body of nations, to have a unified international global framework for ethics and to ensure that these types of events don't happen again. But there's different moral baselines between countries like Denmark, the US, China. You can create these bodies, you can try and get people to follow it. These countries have completely different baselines, different governing systems, bodies, and just different ways of operating. So I wanted to ask you, what realistic governance architecture do you think prevents that slide into a genetic class system or a state-run enhancement race? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So probably the biggest challenge we face in the world today is the mismatch between the nature of our exponential technologies and our individual, even superpowers that all of us have, and the absence of sufficient collective frameworks for governing and managing those godlike capabilities. And so in my new book, Superconvergence, in the last chapter, I lay out a whole framework for how we can think about governance. Governance is much bigger than government regulations. It's really what happens at every level. And in the pyramid that I have in that book, at the base of the pyramid are individuals, individual education, engagement, empowerment. What we're talking about is really, it's a fundamental species-wide and worldwide transformation. And so everybody needs to be part of the process of figuring out what's next. And then there's what happens in our different communities, whether it's universities like yours or hospital systems or companies. And then there's what happens in our regions, our cities, our countries, our nations, internationally, globally. To manage these effectively, we need to have a system that brings everybody together. In the 1940s, a generation of highly insightful leaders recognized that a world of competing nations was no longer sufficient. And that's why they created these international organizations like the UN, the Bretton Woods, World Bank, and IMF, the European Union, in order to bring countries together. Now we're in large part witnessing at least the insufficiency of those systems, which are pretty much failing. I mean, the United Nations, if the founders of the UN could get in a time machine and come today, they would all break down in tears that the vision of what they imagine the UN could be is not realized. And so not only do we need to revitalize the vision of countries coming together, not even out of just hard-nosed self-interest, we need to add another layer, just like the human brain is like scoops of ice cream on top of each other on a cone. We need to layer on. So in the 17th century, starting in Europe and then growing from there, we had the concept of the modern nation state. In the middle of the 20th century, the idea of international. Now we need another scoop. That's why I and others in 2020 founded the Global Interdependence Movement, One Shared World. We need another scoop on top of this ice cream cone. And I can tell you what that scoop is. It's harder to say how we're going to get there. I know we're going to get there in one of two ways. So the scoop is an additional layer of our global operating system based on the mutual responsibilities of our complex global interdependence. We're going to get there. 99% chance we'll get there because we don't do anything now and there's some terrible crisis. There's an ocean ecosystem collapse or a nuclear war or a synthetic biology pandemic or some other terrible thing. And then we crawl out from our little caves and holes like our ancestors did 65 million years ago.
I'm envisioning this in my head.
Yeah. And then we'll say, hey, let's organize a world based on what it's going to take to keep us safe. 1% chance, that's why I'm happy to do this interview with you, but 1% chance we get people of good faith who come together and say, hey, we are developing these godlike, life-changing capabilities. If we use them wisely, the future knows no bounds. We can do all these wonderful things. We can enhance our health, enhance the health and sustainability of all living creatures and of our planet. We can cure diseases. We can grow crops, we can do all these incredible things. And if we get it wrong, we can really harm the world in very significant ways as we know it. So with the spirit of love and openness in our hearts, why don't we try to build that system that we know we need? That's the right answer. It's hard to get there. And that's why young people like you, like the young people who are at the heart of One Shared World, really need to work in that direction. It's also why I'm such a fierce critic of people like Greta Thunberg, because it's not only wasteful, it is harmful to get everybody all spun up and then to march everybody into the sea. What's better is that young people have never been more educated, engaged, empowered, connected. For young people not to say, let's engage in outrage theatrics or skip school on Friday. The worst thing young people can do is skip school on Friday. What young people should be doing is saying, the world that we are currently living in is unsustainable. And here's a vision of what it could be. And we're going to build a movement to march in that direction based on knowledge and wisdom and empowerment. So I think that's the answer. And we just need to get beyond this social media world where the best thing that somebody can do to gain support is engage in outrage.
Yeah, definitely. I've always found those to be a bit performative. I totally agree with you that I think something that we're seeing education rates rising, the percent of young people that are going to college and learning about what's happening in the world. I feel like that will be our biggest asset in the years to come. And I think you really touched on that very beautifully. You
Yeah,
kind of,
what I was saying is people don't even have to go to college. There are lots of people who aren't
Sure.
going to college who have an equal voice, who can
Mhm.
really understand things. The people not going to college, certainly in the developing world, are no less smart than those of us who have all these wonderful educational opportunities. It's just that they live with different realities. And I think there's a real opportunity to engage those people. I speak to all kinds of groups. I spoke to the top scientists at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and I've spoken to 7th and 8th graders. Everybody at their core gets these issues. I have a friend who I met this last summer who is a San person. So San is one of the ethnic groups in the Kalahari. They speak with not their entire language, but a lot of clicks in there. And I gave him a copy of Superconvergence, and he read it twice. First, he read it quickly in 3 days,
Oh,
and then
wonderful.
slowly the next 3 days. And then he was going back to his village to do a training with everybody about the future of agriculture and what it might mean for them. He got it as much or more than anybody else who is reading my book. So I just think that what
Yeah.
we're talking about, these are species-wide transformations. And we as a species need to be part of making collectively the decisions about how we use or don't use these technologies. But it's happening very quickly. And so that's why we need to have this kind of engagement.
Yeah, no, very important point. I think it's very easy for, at least for me, to be biased, being surrounded by so many amazingly intelligent people here, but an
I'm
important
also
point for sure.
Yeah, no, I'm also a Harvard alum, so I love being,
Right.
and I was at Oxford, so I love being in those, and Brown, which was a little more kooky, but also great. But I love those environments, and I think it's great. I mean, I think it's great to be in those environments, to learn and to grow. But the key thing is to recognize that none of us live on an island, and there's a responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in your previous point, you were touching on sort of the AI/ post-AGI future briefly. I don't know if
Yes.
that's what you were referencing specifically. And that,
Yeah.
obviously, your thesis in Superconvergence, and I read it, wonderful book, really fantastic, is that AI isn't just some other technology, right? It is the most important, arguably. It's the catalytic layer that's accelerating everything, drug discovery, geopolitics. I mean, it's going to be really, really huge. And so I've noticed that there's kind of these two camps with two differing beliefs about the future of AI. One of them kind of obsesses over super alignment and this extinction risk, which I know a lot of people at Harvard who truly do believe that. And then the other kind of focuses on the immediate harms like bias and labor shocks and things of that nature. So I was wondering if you were kind of handed the gavel at the G tomorrow, how would you collapse that split into a single actionable agenda? You have these two very different voices. what is like one measurable variable, maybe like a global AI vital sign or something that could compel every nation and every company to report these quarterly measurements that we can track in real time, whether AI development is trending towards something that's beneficial or something that's more of like an arms race.
The title of my new book is Superconvergence. And
Right.
that means the superconvergence of different technologies. The AI story isn't just the AI story. It's these technologies coming together where every technology is embedded in every other technology and inspires every other technology. We have the agricultural revolution starting 12,000 years ago that allowed the civilizational revolution that required that we develop our writing systems, which laid the foundation of our computer codes, which made the machine learning revolution possible, which made AI possible. And now we're using AI tools to interrogate the natural world and to understand just simple, evolved natural models that we're using to redesign AI and computer chips and all of these things. So it's an accelerating cycle, and it's not just AI. AGI, I have non-traditional views. I don't think we're building artificial intelligence. If by artificial intelligence, I presume we mean artificial human intelligence. That's not what we're building. We're building machine intelligence, machine super intelligence. And it's inspired by our form of intelligence, but it's organized in different ways. It's doing different things. It will have its own evolutionary trajectory. That's why I would say that this whole concept of AGI is bullshit. But instead, I will say it's poppycock. And the reason is human intelligence, we're not just kind of our brain thinking, walking around on stilts. Human intelligence is evolved and embodied. It's connected to all of these senses that are much different than the thought process that goes into certainly written language, but even all of our cultural products for all of history. So this concept of AGI, in my view, is nonsense because machines will never be able to do everything that humans do, and humans will never be able to do everything that machines do. We don't have that standard for dogs or dolphins. We don't call dolphin intelligence is artificial intelligence. It's artificial human intelligence. So this is just something else. Certainly, it is the case, and already is the case, that these AI systems are going to do more things and parts of things that humans do now. And we're seeing it across the board. We're certainly seeing it in the acceleration of coding, where coding is getting 30 to 50% faster. And we're starting to see its applications, as I write about in Superconvergence, across multiple fields, including healthcare, plant and animal agriculture, energy, advanced materials, data storage, lots more. We are going to see this transition, and it's going to happen relatively quickly, but we've seen these transitions before. I mean, we saw it happen with industrialization. We saw it happen with computers. And so new things will be created. Every job will change, and some people will be displaced. I don't think that we're going to live in a world where humans don't have anything to do, because humans we're very creative at coming up with stuff that our ancestors would be scratching their heads. Like if you had told even our great grandparents that they say, well, do you have a job? And they probably would have meant, are you engaged in farming or some kind of commerce? And you'd say, yes, I have a job. And they would say, well, what's your job? And it's like, I'm an executive in the National Football League. And they would say, oh, what's that? Well, it's a game where you throw a little ball and you go up and down the field and you try to score points. Like, what would they say?
Such a useless activity.
It sounds like, and yet if you were to meet somebody, if Roger Goodell came to Harvard to give a talk, it would be this huge thing. Or our yoga masters, and we're going to need all of those things. Even in a world where AI systems are doing coding, we're going to need brilliant humans to manage and oversee. And we're going to find that there are things that are really simple for us humans to do that machines can't do. And so we're going to have just humans be professional humans, which will be a relatively easy but low-paying job. So we're just going to see a shift like we've seen in other of these revolutions. And it used to be that everybody was engaged in farming, hunting, and gathering. And then we had some people who were soldiers, and we got more and more things. And that's going to happen very rapidly. So it's the speed of the change that I think is a real threat. It's going to put a lot of pressure on education systems, and the countries that are really thinking wisely about what happens next are going to be in a phenomenal position. Countries like Estonia, Finland, Singapore, UAE, maybe Israel. I mean, these countries are going to be in great shape because there is incredible opportunity. But the countries that miss it, the countries that see their human resources as expendable, I think are really going to suffer. So like with every technological revolution, there's going to be a shift, and power and economic power and other kinds of power are going to shift as well.
Your belief is that AGI is not really an existential threat or concern.
Well, so I don't think AGI is a real thing. Like, I think AGI is just poppycock. But that doesn't mean that these systems aren't becoming exponentially more powerful and influential. That doesn't mean that we couldn't have a misalignment problem, because you just look at what's happening in Ukraine. The killer robots are not 100% autonomous in Ukraine. Is that the soldiers, the Ukrainians and the Russians, have found that they can be more deadly if there is a human in the loop. The human isn't in the loop to protect them from killing. The human is in the loop because they have so far found it's a more effective way to kill with humans playing that role. Be the case. And so we're already beginning to see displacements. It's just the way our societies have always worked. Again, there's a reason why not everybody is a farmer. We are beneficiaries of not everybody being a farmer. That's why you and I are on this call, because we don't have to be farmers or hunters and gatherers in order to feed ourselves. We're able to do other things. And so it's great, but there is continuous displacement. And that's the question for our societies. I mean, do we want to move forward? Yes. Do we need to invest very, very heavily in alignment, in governance, in regulation, in accountability, in educating people about how to best use these superpowers, in develop strong civil societies and civic traditions? We have to do those things. I think there are different futures ahead of us. If we want the better future, now is the time to invest. If we don't make those investments, then we're increasing the odds of the kind of future that we don't want.
Honestly, it's really refreshing to hear that more conservative viewpoint. It scares me. So it's super refreshing to hear that. I think a question that I really wanted to ask you, and it might be one of the last questions that we get to today. You've obviously sit in a lot of boardrooms where executives speak a lot more candidly than they would normally talk in press releases and things of that nature. Which AI failure mode do you think that they privately yet rarely acknowledge publicly?
So I speak to a lot of boards, I speak to a lot of executives, and I'll tell you what my message is and what their responses in general have been. What I always say to the companies that I meet with, if the first question that you ask is, how can I best use these technologies? You have failed in your first step of the journey, because like with any journey, if you take the first step in the wrong direction, your journey is over from the start. The first step needs to be, who am I? What do I stand for? And what am I trying to achieve? And then the second step is, in order to achieve those goals aligned with my identity and my values, what's the right mix? Human capabilities and machine capabilities and other inputs in order to achieve those goals. And the danger for a lot of these companies is there's so much pressure on AI. You have to change the name of your company to have the word AI. And I guarantee you, whatever X years from now, people are going to be changing their names back because there'll be some new name, just like metaverse was the thing. And now it's AI. And it's the exact same technologies. They keep getting a makeover every few years. And then everyone's rushing to say, I never believed in the metaverse. I only believe in AI. And then there'll be a next thing and a next thing. One is moving too slow. The other is to just feel like technology is going to magically solve your problems, because it's the same values, same systems that have driven us, identity, value. That's what needs to go forward. These are very, very powerful technologies. When you find specific use cases, what I tell everybody is don't start with, let's do a full makeover with AI. There's no AI magic button, but find specific problems, specific pain points that can be addressed using these technologies and build up. And people have so much insecurity. People feel like, oh, I don't know anything. I better get some kind of foreign entity to come and tell me what to do. But they don't know either. Like they're just, I mean, everybody, it's not bluffing. It's that we are figuring all of this out on a civilizational level. And that's why I'm so happy to be with you, Shriya. It's why these kinds of conversations are so important. Nobody has all of the answers, but together we can have processes that can allow us to move forward together with systems of mutual respect, education, empowerment, accountability that will increase the odds of a positive outcome and decrease the odds of a negative one.
I definitely can feel the pressure for a lot of companies to adopt AI. I mean, we're seeing like AI replacing software engineers in a lot of places.
We're finding out that AI can do certain things in the writing of software that humans can do. My feeling is there will be superstar human coders. To be a human coder, you really are going to have to be greater than you've had to be in a past generation. So now for coding, it's kind of the autocomplete phase of coding, where you're writing something, it says, hey, what about this? And that's what's speeding it up. But we're moving toward the next phase of coding where you can say, here's what I'm trying to do, and write me a program. And then you can say, now debug the program, now test the program. But still, we're going to want to have humans to do what we call in Yiddish, seichel. Ask your friends what that means, but it's the intersection of smarts and wisdom. And so humans are going to need to play that kind of role. But to do it, humans can't function as second-rate machines, like doing a machine function worse than a machine. We need to be first-rate humans. And figuring out what that means is going to be very, very important for how we educate young people, for the jobs that we do. And it's going to be a dynamic process because we're going to find the machines are better, increasingly better at a lot of things. And then we're going to find there are a lot of things that we think machines should be better at, but they haven't evolved over 3.8 billion years like we have, and they just, for now, can't do it. And so there's a role for everybody, just like there's a role for human farmers and collectors, and with every other technology.
I feel like for now, we're definitely going to need machine learning researchers and engineers who can help create these models. Some people actually think that in some time, these AI models will be able to do machine learning research and repopulate themselves, basically, which is...
They will. I mean, there's no doubt about it because they're always evolving. But the rate of our change, our brains are roughly the same as they've been for tens of thousands, even millions of years. So we're kind of as smart as we were 10,000, 20,000 years ago. Collectively, as part of our cultural knowledge, which includes these systems, we are on an exponential J curve. Collectively, humans are advancing with incredible rapidity. But these systems, the AI systems, are evolving faster than humans, even though they are part of our cultural evolution. And that's really significant. So the machines are going to be able to do more and cooler things. But that is going to free us to do other things. Like I was just giving a talk in Scottsdale just a few days ago. And before I went on, there was one of the other speakers, and they said, they were asking me, what would happen if just before your talk, somebody gave another talk and they said everything that you were going to say? And I said, well, that would be phenomenal news for me because I've got 10,000 things to say. If somebody just did me the honor of replicating my entire talk before I went on, that would free me to give the next level talk or the next level talk. And so that's humans. We need to be going to that next level continuously. And that's why universities are so important. That's why the current attack on universities is so threatening. Universities are the place that we have created to embody these systems of knowledge. It's our cultural inheritance as humans, which allows us to say, you don't have to invent all of science on your own to be a scientist. You're at the university learning as much of all of science up to this point as you can. And then your job as a scientist or whatever you choose to do will say, well, how can I take that one step further or 10 steps further? So we need to keep continually pressing forward, asking ourselves, what does it mean to be the best possible human in an age of revolutionary machines?
Yeah, there's a really good point you had earlier about universities being so important. And that's my take on the current funding cuts. You could argue that maybe this will force more privatization of biological innovation, mostly biology, to be honest, because I feel it's mostly government and publicly funded. So maybe we'll shift more towards that. But I feel like it's a zero-sum game. It's a lose-lose situation because the human capital is coming from these universities, the PhD students who are creating these drugs in their PhDs and spinning out companies. That model is going to be totally, it just ruins everything, I feel. I don't know,
Yes.
like,
For no upside.
uh,
It really is for no upside. It wasn't some kind of preordained fate that the United States became the scientific and technological leader of the world. There were some really wise investments, including people like Vannevar Bush, who was the science and technology advisor to FDR, laid the foundation in the 40s and the 50s for this collaboration triangle between government, university, and business. That's been the driver of so much, and certainly our advances in healthcare, the internet, so many different areas. And now that system is under attack, as far as I can tell, for no purpose other than seeking societal dominance. If you look at places like Iran or Venezuela or Turkey or Hungary, you can see the game plan for what appears to be happening here, which is a small group of people feels that if you can gain enough control of the commanding heights of culture, politics, and economics, you can create a corrupt enough system, a pay-to-play system, which is why our country has become largely a crypto scam where the systems are broken down and the way to get your company the advantages, whether it's exemptions from tariffs or something else, is to have under the table payments to World Liberty or some one of these other crypto scams, and to have cultural dominance so you can set the narrative in society. And that's why Americans are having such a hard time understanding what's happening here. It's like if you took your little dog Chihuahua from home and dropped it on its own in the middle of a rainforest, it would get eaten in about 15 seconds. And the reason for that is this Chihuahua has only lived in your apartment and it's not adapted. And so one of the reasons why it seems like people from Latin America, from Eastern Europe, Jews, and others can look at what's happening in this country and say, hey, this really feels familiar, is that we have in our recent memory banks examples of societies where this kind of thing has happened. Institutions have been compromised. Small groups of people seek to dominate as a way of doing whatever it is seeking to do. Everything that we've talked about today is connected to these broader societal issues of governance, democracy, accountability. You can't have responsible science in an authoritarian system. That's the story of Jiankui.
So-
My view is, I think, I've been at the center of questions regarding the origins of COVID-19, and I've said
Yes.
repeatedly, the COVID-19 pandemic results from the unique pathologies of the Chinese state. All of these things are connected, and that's why our struggle for effective science that's not just, and technology, not just sustainable, but that is as beneficial as possible, is inextricable from our conversations about how do we build just and equitable societies.
Totally. I'm totally with you on that. I also see it as just like a power play. To my belief, I can't draw up any economic justification for any of this. So it looks like we're running a little low on time here. I'm just going to ask you one more question and then I'll let you go. I really appreciate all the time that you spent so far. And this will be a pretty simple question to all the students who are watching. A lot of us see your books in the Harvard Co-op. We see your books there. So if there is one of your books that you would encourage students to read right now at this time, which of them would you suggest?
Do you have siblings, Shriya?
Yeah. I have a little sister.
All right, so ask your parents which of their children they like more. You'll get the same answer from me. But what I will tell you is, as a writer, if your most recent book isn't what you believe is your best book, you're actually moving in the wrong direction. I encourage you to read Superconvergence. The paperback version is coming out this year, 2025. In October. And so it's highly revised. It includes all kinds of the incredible stuff that's happened since the hardback came out last year. When you're doing a revision of a book, it's a test of the book. If your thesis ends up being wrong as a result of new developments, your book was a terrible book. If your thesis was, but there are examples that are even cooler than the examples that you had because they just hadn't happened when the last version came out. So that's coming out. And so I hope I actually have a first draft of what will be my next book. So I've written 3 nonfiction books and 3 novels. The reason why I write novels is because, just like we've experienced in our conversation today, what we're talking about, it's not just science, it's not just technology, it's not just society, it's humanity. I mean, these ideas and issues are touching on our core identity as humans. So my newest book, I don't know when it come out, but I'm done with the first draft. It's called Virtuosa.
Congrats.
And it's about the intersection of artificial intelligence, robotics, and classical music. And right now we have this idea of what machines can and can't do. And people say this stuff, which doesn't make sense to me. Oh, machines will never have consciousness. Machines will never experience love. Machines will never be creative. And we can't define those things for ourselves. Like, we can't define what is consciousness, what is love, what is creativity. If we got really technical, we would break every one of those things down. Love has 100 different components. I'm thirsty. And my partner never does it. She says, oh, no, I'm kind of busy. I'm doing something else. I probably, after years of saying, every morning I wake up on Thursday, I ask for a glass of water, you never do, I probably would love her a little bit less. But if I had a robot and every morning I woke up and I said, hey, can you get me a glass of water? And the robot got me a glass of water, I'd say, oh, I love the robot a little bit more. And so getting a glass of water in the morning must be some small component part of love. And so that's what I'm exploring in the book is there will be a crossover moment where these machines, they're not becoming humans, but they are going to be doing things that feel very human to us.
Oh, yeah.
Whether that's composing or playing music in ways that are just phenomenal, even to us, or extrasensory even to us. And so that's why I'm exploring that in the context of classical music. I don't know when that will come out, but if I had to guess,
I'm
it
looking
would be
forward to it.
late in 2026.
Okay, great. That's
Maybe I'll come to Harvard and do another. I've done a bunch of talks at Harvard.
100%. I would love to MC that if that ever happens. But I mean, that's a very, very strong point. I think, obviously everyone knows how robust these models are at coding, at math, at science, but the one missing point here is that creativity aspect. And some people argue that GPT 4.5 is creative. I would say it's not. I've used it. It's okay. But these tasks that combined with robotics, especially because that is veering towards a human-like mechanical behaviors, right? And so I think that's a really, really cool thing to explore.
If you're doing something and I should say that I'm a marathon runner and I'm running slower than I ran in my youth, but I'm saying everyone should aspire to be as great as you can be for where you are at every given moment. So as a writer,
definitely,
I hope that I'm accruing whatever wisdom I have and sharing it in meaningful ways.
Yeah, of course.